Call him the prophet who profits. 20 years ago, Peter Popoff was a televangelist who just declared bankruptcy after his preaching methods were exposed as a fraud.
Few televangelists have risen, fallen, and returned like Peter Popoff. Once a famous face in religious broadcasting, he became the center of a scandal that shocked millions and nearly ended his career. His story moves through claims of miracles, divine healing, media power, and public doubt. More than a story about one preacher, Popoff's life reveals the fragile line between faith, spectacle, and controversy. The exposure that shattered trust. For years, Peter Popoff convinced millions that he possessed miraculous gifts. Through dramatic healing services and claims of divine knowledge, he built a reputation as one of the most recognizable figures in televangelism. But in 1986, investigator James Randi uncovered evidence that would transform one of televangelism's biggest stars into one of its biggest scandals. The revelation stunned millions. Using radio scanner technology, Randi discovered that Popoff was not receiving divine messages during his healing services. Instead, information was secretly being transmitted to him through an earpiece by his wife. These messages included the names and ailments of audience members that had reportedly been collected through prayer request cards before the events. The exposure painted Popoff as a calculated fraud, manipulating faith for profit, and sparked immediate outrage. The exposure was as dramatic as Popoff's own performances. Randi staged a public investigation on a popular television program, letting audiences witness the deception firsthand. Viewers heard the whispered instructions intended only for Popoff, undermining every claim of supernatural insight. For many, the moment shattered illusions they had held dear, raising urgent questions about the validity of his ministry and the ethical boundaries crossed to maintain it. Beyond television, the aftermath unleashed a wave of investigations by journalists and regulatory authorities. Questions swirled about how much money Popoff had collected under false pretenses and whether his ministry had violated laws related to fraud and charity practices. The scandal quickly became headline news, symbolizing a larger crisis of trust surrounding televangelists and their financial dealings. Popoff's name was synonymous with deceit in the public eye almost overnight. The betrayal felt by supporters was profound. Many had invested not only money but hope and belief in Popoff's healing powers. To discover that these claims were orchestrated, performances fueled anger, disillusionment, and a deep sense of loss. Some congregants felt manipulated on a fundamental level, spiritually and emotionally, and turned away from the ministry in shame or protest. The whole scandal kinda kicked off a wider cultural chat about how televangelism and those charismatic religious folks fit into American life. Arguments started flying, especially around faith healing, church-related fundraising, and who's actually responsible, like the real accountability owed to easily swayed followers. Popoff's downfall turned into one of those grim warning stories, warning people about what happens when showmanship crowds out meaning and when greed slips into spiritual leadership. After all of that, the legal consequences came too, with a handful of lawsuits aimed at Popoff's organization for deceptive conduct. Even though he dodged criminal conviction, the hit to his reputation was brutal. Television networks dropped his shows, donors kinda dried up, and his ministry drifted toward near collapse. That sudden flip made it clear how fast public opinion can turn once trust gets worn down. Also, this exposure really underscored the power of technology and what you might call media savvy in spotting religious fraud. What used to hide behind the pulpit got laid bare by modern investigative tools, and it changed the whole oversight atmosphere for televangelism. Popoff's situation became an important benchmark, showing how charismatic ministries can be more vulnerable to scrutiny than they assume. Even with public disgrace and professional ruin, Popoff's story wasn't really over. His collapse was devastating, yes, but it also helped set the stage for an unexpected comeback, one built on resilience and reinvention. To understand how Peter Popoff built a ministry powerful enough to captivate millions before it all came crashing down, it's important to go back to where his rise first began. The rise of a televangelist. Peter Popoff's story begins with humble origins. Born in Stuttgart, Germany, in 1946, and raised in the United States, where he would eventually carve out a powerful niche in Christian broadcasting. By the late 1970s, he had become a fixture in televangelism, blending fiery sermons with claims of miraculous healing that attracted large crowds. His charisma and dramatic style captivated audiences hungry for spiritual renewal, and his television ministry rapidly expanded across America, promising hope and transformation. At its height, Popoff's reach seemed unstoppable, with viewers sending in countless testimonials and donations to support his growing empire. Popoff's ministry was fueled by the promise of divine intervention, leading thousands to believe in his supernatural gifts. He claimed to receive messages directly from God that revealed personal information about congregation members, such as names and specific ailments, enticing viewers with demonstrations of healing miracles. This sense of intimacy and divine insight created a powerful rapport with followers, many of whom saw him as a direct line to the miraculous. The televised events were theatrical but emotionally charged, drawing large audiences and millions of dollars in offerings. His tactics were well-honed and adapted for the emerging medium of television. By combining gospel fervor with audience participation and faith healing, Popoff tapped into a marketplace eager for spiritual promises delivered with spectacle. His use of mailing lists and direct appeals deepened the financial support, while personal stories of healing circulated widely, feeding the cycle of belief and donation. The televangelist model he embraced was both innovative and effective, positioning him as a major player in religious media. Despite the success, Popoff's ministry operated largely without scrutiny in those early years. His confident declarations and dramatic performances masked underpinnings that critics would later find troubling. For the devoted, his ministry was a source of comfort and faith. For skeptics, it raised uncomfortable questions about authenticity and transparency. Still, his influence within evangelical circles only grew, extending into international broadcasts and attracting partnerships with other leaders in the charismatic movement. Popoff's ability to spark belief and then somehow turn it into actual financial backing created this pretty lucrative operation. Donations kept pouring in from viewers who were hoping for healing or maybe just divine attention, which in turn supported an expanding media machine. That machine didn't stay small either. It grew to include television airtime, book sales, and live appearances, all of it feeding the same attention loop. The money surge pushed Popoff into a position that looked great, but was also kind of fragile. He had to keep producing miracles and fresh messages because that's what kept people listening and sending checks. So the stakes were not just spiritual faith, it was also fiscal survival, a mix that would later make his story messy and complicated. Still, not everyone was buying his claims whole, no questions asked. Even while he was rising, there were whispers of skepticism. Some viewers, and even certain religious leaders, questioned whether his so-called divine messages were actually authentic. That push and pull between faith-driven conviction and careful criticism stayed under the surface for a while, simmering but not exploding. For years, Popoff kept presenting himself as a kind of unshakable spiritual authority, helped along by media instincts and by people who remained devoted without wavering. As the 1980s rolled on, his reach kept widening, but you could feel cracks starting in the base of his ministry. Small investigative efforts showed up, and dissenting voices began to surface, suggesting there were deeper problems beneath the performances. Even so, Popoff's shows had serious emotional force, and his followers stayed loyal. Because of that, he was able to remain a big figure in televangelism even as controversy started building around him. These early years paint a complicated portrait of a man who mastered the art of blending faith, media, and fundraising into a thriving ministry. His influence grew rapidly, but the exposure that would eventually shake his credibility had already changed everything. Once the truth came to light, the empire he had spent years building faced its greatest test. What followed was a dramatic collapse. As public trust vanished, financial support dried up, and one of televangelism's most recognizable ministries struggled to survive. The fallout and ministry collapse. The 1986 expose devastated Peter Popoff's ministry. Television networks cut ties, donations collapsed, and the large media operation that had fueled his success quickly unraveled. What had once appeared to be a thriving empire suddenly faced a financial crisis and public rejection. Popoff became the target of intense criticism, with many accusing him of exploiting faith for personal gain. His healing claims lost credibility, invitations to preach became scarce, and his reputation within both religious and public circles suffered enormous damage. Legal troubles soon followed. Lawsuits alleged that donors had been misled, while government agencies reviewed the ministry's finances. Combined with the public backlash, these investigations made it nearly impossible for the ministry to continue as it once had. For a time, Popoff stepped away from the spotlight. The scandal forced him to confront not only financial losses, but also the collapse of the trust that had sustained his ministry. His downfall also sent shockwaves through televangelism, encouraging greater public skepticism and pushing many ministries to strengthen accountability. Despite everything, a loyal group of supporters remained. Some believed the scandal was an attack on their faith, rather than proof of wrongdoing, continuing to stand by Popoff during his lowest point. That loyal following became the foundation for his eventual return. Instead of relying on major television networks, Popoff rebuilt through direct mail campaigns, smaller broadcasts, and a renewed fundraising strategy. Though far smaller than before, these efforts allowed his ministry to survive and gradually regain an audience. Ultimately, Popoff's collapse showed how quickly influence built on media, public trust, and financial support can disappear. Yet it also demonstrated how resilience, loyal followers, and strategic reinvention can keep a controversial figure in the public eye long after many believed his ministry was finished. The seeds for his resurgence were sown in that crucible of failure, leading him on a path few expected, but many came to witness. The unlikely comeback. Peter Popoff's fall from grace in the late 1980s seemed definitive, yet his story took an unexpected turn in the decades that followed. Against the odds, he managed to resurrect his ministry, capitalizing on a loyal core group of followers and a shifting media landscape. With a shrewd combination of reinvention and selective messaging, Popoff returned to television with a new focus that distanced itself from the earlier scandals while maintaining key elements of faith healing and prosperity preaching. This comeback demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt and survive in a world often unforgiving of failure. Central to Popoff's rebirth was his embrace of infomercials and direct response television, a marketing strategy that allowed him to reach dedicated viewers willing to support his ministry financially. Rather than relying on major networks, he bought airtime on smaller stations and late-night slots, cultivating an audience less concerned with his past than with present promises. This shift to a more targeted, commercial approach helped stabilize his ministry's finances and expanded his reach internationally. His revitalized programming featured testimonials, scripture, and appeals for donations framed around blessings and prosperity. Popoff also kind of refreshed his public image, like presenting himself as a humble, repentant servant of God. And somehow his mission was said to be the same, even with those earlier missteps. He talked pretty openly about God's grace and these second chances, tapping into the whole redemption angle that seemed to land with a lot of viewers. That reframing made the public view a bit softer in some circles, and it also doubled down on his appeal for people looking for hope during their own personal struggles. And yeah, the non-stop optimism Plus, the spotlight on miraculous healing kept fueling both his evangelical message and his fundraising pushes. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, his operation got more tightly controlled, professionally managed, and arranged. The ministry invested in better production values, smoother presentations, and planned fundraising campaigns meant to maximize viewer engagement. This kind of professional shift let Popoff not just keep going, but really thrive in a more competitive religious broadcasting world, showing his resilience wasn't only charisma. The whole evolution basically suggests how media savvy and business instincts can give new breath to a ministry that was once described as crippled. But yeah, controversy sort of stayed hovering around Popoff's recovery, even after everything. Skeptics stayed pretty loud, like they're accusing him of doing the same deceptive moves, just wearing another outfit or a different guise. Critics kept pointing out how he was still making claims about divine knowledge and healing, but without verified evidence, which they call out as basically repeating past patterns. Still, for a dedicated chunk of followers, this whole backlash didn't really break anything. It more or less reinforced their loyalty, because moments of faith and the sense of healing, even if nobody can verify it, can feel deeply meaningful to them. That push and pull between belief and doubt kind of sticks around, and it still feels like a defining feature of how his ministry lands in public. Popoff's comeback also kind of echoed wider trends in American televangelism, where sensational claims, prosperity teaching, and big mass media marketing keep pulling in dedicated viewers. His story suggests that ministries can, in a way, survive scandals by changing the way they talk and by using newer broadcast technologies. And honestly, the staying power of Popoff's ministry complicates the easy idea that accountability and reputation operate the same way in religious circles. It even makes people look again at faith, forgiveness, and commerce, like they aren't separate things, or at least not as cleanly as people assume. The trajectory of his comeback naturally leads to an examination of the specific methods and tactics that defined his ministry's appeal and fueled both support and criticism. Techniques and tactics explained. Peter Popoff's ministry was built on a powerful mix of faith, performance, and persuasion. His services often featured dramatic, divine revelations where he appeared to know personal details about people in the audience. To believers, it felt miraculous. To critics, it became one of the clearest examples of staged spiritual showmanship. One of the most infamous tactics involved collecting personal information through prayer cards, questionnaires, and mailing lists. During live events, that information was reportedly fed to Popoff through an earpiece, making ordinary details appear like messages from God. When this method was exposed, it shattered much of his credibility and became a major scandal in televangelist history. But Popoff's influence was not based on information alone. His events used emotional music, lighting, dramatic prayers, and intense audience reactions to create a powerful atmosphere. These elements helped people feel surrounded by spiritual urgency, making them more likely to believe, respond, and donate. Another key part of his message was prosperity theology, the idea that giving money to the ministry could lead to blessings, healing, or financial breakthrough. This made donations feel like acts of faith, but critics argued it blurred the line between religious devotion and financial pressure. Behind the scenes, Popoff's organization also relied on direct marketing. Mailing lists, personalized letters, follow-up messages, and later digital outreach helped maintain strong connections with donors. These methods made supporters feel personally seen and spiritually connected, even from far away. Critics say these tactics exploited vulnerable people searching for healing, hope, or financial relief. Supporters, however, argue that his ministry offered comfort, encouragement, and real spiritual meaning. This divide is what makes Popoff's story so controversial. Ultimately, his techniques show how media, emotion, theology, and marketing can work together to create lasting religious influence. His career is not only about one preacher's scandal, but also about the larger question of how faith can be shaped, and sometimes manipulated through performance and modern communication. The unfolding of his ministry's methods naturally leads to questions about his legacy and what lessons his life imparts to followers and critics alike. Legacy and lessons learned. Peter Popoff's legacy is defined by remarkable success, public scandal, and an extraordinary comeback. His story sits at the crossroads of faith, media, and money, making him one of the most controversial figures in modern televangelism. While some see him as a source of hope, others view his ministry as a warning about the dangers of unchecked spiritual authority. His exposure in the 1980s changed more than his own reputation did. It kind of amplified the public scrutiny of televangelists and pushed people toward bigger, sharper demands for transparency and accountability in religious broadcasting. For many, it became this lesson about questioning extraordinary claims rather than taking them at face value, no evidence required. But Popoff's return also kind of shows how strong personal faith can still be. A lot of supporters kept believing his ministry brought healing and encouragement even after years of controversy. Their loyalty points to the way spiritual conviction often drifts past public opinion, and that makes his influence hard to fully dismiss, even after repeated criticism is thrown at him. His career also reflects how televangelism has evolved. When he leaned into television, direct mail, and later digital platforms, Popoff adapted to shifting technology and kept his message up front for fresh audiences. And that shift brings up uncomfortable questions about how religious organizations should juggle outreach, fundraising, and ethical responsibility, especially in a world that's getting more connected by the minute. Ultimately, Peter Popoff's story kind of resists any neat conclusion. For critics, it's a warning about deception and the business-like commercialization of faith. For supporters, it's basically proof of redemption, persistence, and a firm faith that doesn't bend. Either way, his life stays a strong reminder that faith, influence, and accountability are tightly linked, and that separating genuine conviction from persuasive spectacle is still a challenge that keeps showing up long after any one man's ministry. Peter Popoff's story is a powerful mix of faith, controversy, downfall, and revival that challenges how we view spiritual leadership today. His life shows the fine line between hope and deception, and the lasting impact of media on religion. If you found this deep dive illuminating, please like and subscribe for more stories unpacking the lives behind the headlines. And before you leave, watch the next video on your screen, because the story waiting there may reveal an even darker side of fame, faith, and power.